Hello and welcome back to the Bird Channel, where we talk about stories in movies, book shows and games, and I stream 5 days a week on twitch.tv/Jinsey. I know it's not October, but I want to talk about necromancy today and the story surrounding it, of course. Mainly because I personally wanted to know more, and so you have to know with me now. Let's start at the beginning, with the very first few mentions of necromantic practice in history. Gather round the fire, and let me tell you a tale. Necromancy. The art of resurrecting the dead as shambling skeletons. At least usually. But where did it come from? Humanity in general, as far as we know. It not only predates the Renaissance, where it got a more popular foothold, but it's been around since humans were capable of thinking about death in the first place. And much like many other magically inclined practices, it certainly wasn't always portrayed as evil, nor was its only use that of shambling skeleton armies. Necromancy was widespread indeed. In Babylon, we had the Manzazu or Sha'etemu. Although they didn't raise armies, they used necromancy largely to ask the spirits of their ancestors for aid and advice. Which makes sense even now, given that the word necromancy, in its original form, meant something close to predicting the future by conjuring the dead. It was believed that because the dead were closer to the gods, they would know things others could not, and so would warn others about coming dangers. And this is something that comes back in a lot of necromantic beliefs. Notably, Odin once summoned Osiris from the dead to regale him of the future. Seder, as the Norse magical practice was called, was generally seen as a feminine art, but legends tell that Odin was taught this skill by Freya herself, so I'd like to see someone tell Odin to cut it out. Hey Odin, are you casting spells?
Yes, I am.
What are you, a woman?
I mean, the women in our pantheon are wildly powerful.
Yeah, I mean, you're all feminine, is what I mean.
Yes, I am not afraid to be in touch with my feminine side and also summon the dead.
Yeah, this really isn't going how I thought it would.
Do you mind? I'm trying to see the future of all that is to come through my feminine magic.
Damn, that is very cool. Although largely the most interesting Seder tales are definitely found featuring women. And one story that I absolutely have to tell you, given that I am a story channel, is that of Skuld. No, not the deity Skuld, but someone perhaps named after her. And it's not completely about necromancy, but it's a really cool story, so I want to tell you anyway. Today's Skuld was a princess. Let's start at the beginning. One Yule night, as everyone was having a grand old party, an ugly-looking creature was going door to door to try and gain entrance, but none would let it in. None except Helgi of Denmark. As a result, the creature decided to ask Helgi if it could sleep in his bed as well, something Helgi somehow agreed to. But once the thing got into bed, it turned into a beautiful elven woman, clad in silk. So of course Helgi did what men of those days often did. He, took her, against her will, and got her pregnant. She informed him that she was carrying his child, and to stop by a boathouse nearby in 9 months to pick up his daughter. Helgi obviously forgot all about that and went back to plundering instead, but that wasn't going to fly this time. 3 years later, a group of elves showed up at night with a brand new child and a curse to accompany Helgi for being a terrible dad already. The child was the curse. The child was Skuld. As she grew up, she learned more about the dark arts than her father might have liked, turning into a rather powerful sorceress in no time. As girls go, though, she did have to marry. So she married the Swedish king, Iorveth, who wasn't too bothered by the fact his new wife could cast curses as easily as she made a chicken dinner. They ruled together for a while, uninterrupted. In the meantime, her father Helgi decided to accidentally marry his own daughter, producing a son with her by the name of Rolf, and then he up and died. To Skuld's dismay, Rolf eventually tricked her husband Iorveth into giving up his crown. Rolf had given Iorveth a sword, and because he accepted the sword, Viking law dictated that Sweden was now officially Denmark's vassal. So now they were stuck paying Rolf tribute every year. And Rolf just kept gaining more and more power and allies, royally pissing off Skuld in the process. She tried to get her husband to tell Rolf to shove his tribute somewhere, but as he was too chicken to do it, Skuld did it herself. She went ahead and asked Rolf for a break from taxes for 3 years, as long as she paid it back afterwards. And because Rolf didn't really care at this point, he agreed. With 3 years' worth of tribute money, however, Skuld had other plans. She used it instead to gather the greatest army the world had ever seen. She recruited not just Vikings, but monsters, elves, and whatever else she could find, using her magic to hide all this from Rolf, of course. She was so good at hiding all this, they didn't notice a thing until she'd marched said army all the way up to the gates of Rolf's castle. And somehow, Rolf still didn't care. He was still full of bravado and absolutely intended to kick her back home to Sweden. And so the two armies clashed. There were so many participants that the field was quickly littered with bodies, and people had to climb entire mountains of them to even get a chance at cutting someone's head off at all. Bothvar Bjarki, one of Rolf's heroes, was a berserker and decided to turn into a monstrous bear, ripping and tearing through everything remotely in his way. Skuld, in turn, summoned an absolutely gigantic wild boar who equally ripped and tore through the landscape. However, Rolf's forces eventually started to push back Skuld's army, so Skuld decided to finally do what she really planned to do all along: necromancy. She started resurrecting Viking zombies left, right, and center. No matter how many were cut down, they'd always get back up again. Even when Bothvar cut off both Iorveth's arms and a leg, after which he was cleft in two entirely, Skuld just necromanced him back together and he went right back to fighting. Skuld and her necromantic army managed to not only defeat Rolf, but also 13 of the most feared warriors of their time. I do believe she earned her place on the throne by that point.
I have a big axe.
I have necromancy.
I have 13 champions.
I have necromancy.
This champion is a monstrous bear.
I have necromancy. And a large boar.
Alright, guess I'll die.
Want to get resurrected?
Sure.
Although apparently she didn't rule very well, and was eventually captured off guard, after which she was tortured to death. There are several different versions available of this tale, of course, but none of them skip on the necromancy, so that's nice. But instances of strictly summoning an army of the dead were still rather rare. The majority of practices still revolved around asking the dead for a spot of advice. In the Odyssey, Odysseus travels to the underworld to raise the dead, so he can ask them about his travels home. And it's not strange that this is how people treated spirits. After all, in ancient Rome, it was believed that after death, one simply moved on to another realm, still very much conscious. Some of them, per Ovid's Metamorphosis, simply continue on their daily lives as if nothing's changed. So why wouldn't they perhaps know more? And for that reason, necromancy wasn't really a dirty word. Yet. Magic didn't really come into question too much until Christianity appeared. Yes, I'm sorry we have to talk about this. They had fun catchphrases like Exodus 20:18, "You must not allow a sorceress to live." Rest in peace, Yennefer of Vengerberg. Leviticus 20:27, "A man or a woman who is a medium or spiritist must surely be put to death. They shall be stoned, their blood is upon them." And other classics. The reason for this should be obvious to most. The church wants you to focus on God, and any type of distraction is unwelcome. Likewise, if any regular John from down the street thought they could simply ring the bell on their ancestors' afterlife door to ask for advice, then that would put a dent in the story of heaven too. And so, during the Renaissance, necromancy was classified as one of the 7 forbidden arts of divination, along with every other dark art and form of magic. They had decided that one would not simply ask your dear deceased grandfather for advice. No, if you were summoning the dead, then they must be spirits, and spirits are devils. No doubt you were conjuring them up to harness their power, which was very evil indeed. Mind you, there were still some forms of magic that the church was absolutely fine with. It's just that no one called it magic because that wasn't a very good look. Things like astrology, for example. People like Isidore of Seville started arguing semantics by this point, noting that there's a difference in summoning ghosts to ask for advice and summoning demons who are attracted to blood, both still falling under the mantle of necromancy. The art had evolved from simple requests for advice to summoning otherworldly beings to bargain for their knowledge and power. But because of people like Isidore, the church still found loopholes to make the summoning of spirits through necromancy technically okay. Through the other magic I mentioned, astrology. Through astrology, they determined what spirits were active and using its calculations, attempted to summon not demons, but angels or elemental spirits. There were still plenty of people around who thought that even the summoning of angels was vile and reprehensible though, noting that whatever you summon through necromancy must automatically be a demon.
Hey, so...
Yeah.
Who is he trying to call?
Well, Saturn is in retrograde.
Is that... Does that mean it's John?
Yeah. Nothing. Never mind.
Okay, he either wants the apocalypse or a grilled cheese.
Well, we could do both.
Yeah, we'll do both.
John, you could come too.
Of course, dark arts practitioners were highly interested in these demons, and despite the church's best efforts, for some reason, there was still a lot of information going around about the hierarchy of hell and all its devils. But the fact remains that no necromancer has ever actually made a pact with the devil, as far as we know. The magical manuals that made it through the sands of time don't whisper a word of it, nor do they ever mock Christianity in general. It's the opposite, actually. Necromancers generally called upon the power of God to control spirits. Largely, they exercised this control by using the true names of the spirits they called upon while invoking the name of God. And if the necromancer did not truly have faith, the ritual would end in disaster. When it came down to it, necromancers were some of the staunchest Christians imaginable. Not surprising, given that very few people could actually read, let alone Latin. So the majority of necromancers were priests and monks and other members of the clergy who had access to education. Unfortunately for them, the church itself would absolutely see them as heretics, likely because necromancy, no matter how piously used, was still generally called upon for purely selfish reasons. Power, fame, money, revenge.
But of course, the Inquisition would start messing with things quite consistently in the end, which meant a lot of interesting grimoires and other necromantic tomes were burned in righteous fire, alongside the heretics themselves. And eventually, even astrology was seen as a bad thing. So really anything even remotely not a Bible was ready for the pyre, in all honesty. Books like Liber Ratielis, or the Book of Raziel, which the church seemed to mostly hate because it contained some Bible fan fiction and a bunch of astrology, and maybe also because Raziel is a really cool name for a potential demon. They also didn't like Picatrix very much, because the whole book just worships planets and stars and all manner of heavenly bodies very openly. I can relate. Also, summoning the spirit of Saturn through the power of necromancy would be extremely dope.
Medieval necromancy was honestly a lot more interesting than modern-day necromancy could ever hope to be. It eventually stopped being entirely vilified, to the point where John Dee, Queen Elizabeth I's advisor, was quite openly summoning the dead to ask questions, in a light-hearted manner, of course. He also invented, I use the term loosely, Enochian magic, the art of asking angels to do stuff for you. Although John Dee, as well as every commoner dabbling in necromancy, would still want to be very careful in terms of what their spirits would predict. Quite a few sorry sods lost their heads, literally, for accidentally attempting to predict a king or queen's death.
And I see... Yes, go on. A death. A death? Oh, exciting. Who is death?
You! Brother's cousin's daughter's chicken.
Oh. Well, that's boring. Off with his head. I should have stuck to shit shoveling.
By now, we've returned to the point of asking the dead questions, exclusively, of course. But we generally sit in a circle and ask, "Are you there?" a lot, until a candle flickers and then we call it a day. If we're feeling especially adventurous, we might even break out the Ouija board and accidentally move the planchette to yes. The Quimbanda religion is likely the closest to proper necromancers at this point, although that isn't all they do, of course.
In all this, why do people generally think of shambling corpses when necromancy is mentioned? As we've seen, that's barely what necromancy is even about. And while that's true, of course, in the real world, it isn't so much in video games, books, and movies. Summoning the dead to fight for you looks really cool, and it is still necromancy, just the most extreme version of it. It's purely a visual thing. We like skeletons, but in so doing, we've inextricably linked necromancy to evil, when it really never was. The closest thing in the real world to consistent raising of the dead through necromancy is probably found in voodoo, but that's the end of it. In most stories, zombies aren't resurrected through necromancy anyway. It's always a potion, or a disease, or mysterious lightning strike. Necromancy, at its core, is just a bunch of people wanting to say hello to their dead relatives. There's nothing wrong with that. And sometimes you just want to know if your boat is going to crash, and if grandmother has the answers, of course you're going to ask her. Anyway, now you know a little more about the history of necromancy. If you're writing a new D&D character at any point, consider crafting a nice, friendly necromancer who doesn't mean any harm whatsoever. See you again when another tale finds us.
I will summon them all! Yes! Walguy, slayer of trolls! Robertson, crusher of mountains! Yes! Septic the maleficent! Ray, the scourge of the seas! Kulsta, the reaver of raids! More! Mike Sveers, the shadow of Cape Town! Adrian Peckle, butcher of demons! Excellent! Present thine army, my lord! Rise, warriors! Guide me to victory! Soldiers that never sleep! My lord? Yes? My lord, I think they've unionized. What? And they brought a small guillotine. I think they're demanding that they do sleep.
I should have really stuck to shit shoveling.